The two-time college basketball national player of the year was a top 10 pick in the NBA draft, and folks are surprised.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, folks? Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a daily national college hoop show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We are your co-hosts. I'm Andy Patton. He is Isaac Shade. You are joining us at the place to get your college basketball content, or in today's case, NBA draft-related content every single day, not just November to March. We are talking college basketball 5 days a week, all year long. Folks, I want to thank you so much for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Special shout out to those everyday listeners. Special shout out to those of you who have joined us on our Discord channel as well. If you have not done so yet, it is free to join. There is a link in the show notes on both audio and video platforms. Today's episode of Locked On College Basketball is brought to you by Game Time. Folks, download the Game Time app now, create an account, and use promo code Locked On College, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Well, the first round of the 2024 NBA draft took place on Wednesday evening. We're talking Zach Edey going in the top 10, what that means for him, what that means for a potential resurgence of big men in the NBA. We're going to talk about Dalton Knecht sliding all the way out of the lottery and ending up in LA with LeBron James and the Lakers, potentially LeBron James and the Lakers, I should say.
We'll see if LeBron's there.
It's not unsigned yet. We're not breaking any news there. We're also going to talk about the players who did not get picked in the first round, notably Kyle Filipowski out of Duke, Johnny Furphy out of Kansas. We'll talk about them to close out the show. But Isaac, let's start kind of piggybacking off the conversation that you and Leaf Tulane of the Locked On NBA Big Board had on Wednesday's show episode of Locked On College Basketball, talking about the big men in this draft class. And we knew that Donovan Clingan was going to go high. He ends up going number 7 to the Portland Trailblazers. For those of you on YouTube repping the PDX shirt here, very excited about Clingan coming over to my area here in Portland. But we knew he'd go high. We knew that we'd see Kel'el Ware in the first round. We expected to see Yves Missi in the first round. Deron Holmes was in that conversation. We'll get to those guys. But the big, huge 300-pound question was about Zach Edey. Some places said he's not a lottery pick. He's barely a first-round pick. Some mocked in the late 20s, mid-20s, somewhere in there. Some places said, no, he's going to be a lottery pick, and he's even in contention for a top 5 pick. That never seemed super realistic, but yet he ends up going 9th in the draft. The Memphis Grizzlies, who were really, really trying to land Donovan Clingan. They were trying to trade up to get to Clingan. Clingan falls to the Blazers. At that point, Memphis doesn't really have an ability to trade with Portland because they want Donovan Clingan. So they draft Clingan. Memphis decides to take Zach Edey. Were you surprised to see Edey in the top 10, despite him having one of the most decorated college basketball careers that you and I have seen in a very long time?
I think I was surprised, Andy, only in that what the NBA has valued or devalued with skill sets like Zach Edey's. And so for that reason, yes. But I think something I've just become accustomed to saying over and over and over again, the tape don't lie, man. Mm-hmm. And it's like, sure, I get it that the modern NBA doesn't love our bigs, and I'm claiming them as ours as college basketball guys. Mm-hmm. But it does, Andy, feel like there's starting to be a little bit of a shift in the wind on that. I'm wondering if we're just starting to see a little bit more of acceptance of a skill set like Zach Edey's, where it's like, dude, somebody like you that's legitimately 7'3", 4", whatever you are, that can set good screens, that can rebound, that can block shots, that knows how to play basketball, that's got the IQ, it is usable in the NBA. And so I think I was surprised because of how the NBA has devalued these guys. But in terms of what you and I have seen from this young man the past several years, I'm not surprised a bit because the dude can play basketball. But oh, wait, I was told he was only big. Andy, apparently he is a skilled basketball player after all.
Edey is so unique. And I think that like trying to make this conversation a larger conversation about bigs is tough because it's not like there's a bunch of Zach Edeys.
That's
There
fair.
weren't previously Zach Edeys who didn't make the NBA, and there's like the guys that I'll use the two teams that you and I cover, like Drew Timme and Armando Bacot are not going to be NBA players. Drew Timme has yet to make it in the NBA. Sorry, Carolina fans, I don't think Armando Bacot's going to be more than
no shock to any of them. Andy.
Yeah, right. Like and like your Oscar Tshiebwe's and your Kofi Coburn's, like there are other players who have fit this bill similarly, but they're not Zach Edey. Zach Edey is got a half a foot on most of those guys, if not more, for starters. But he's so big, he's so dynamic around the rim. Like, yes, he has his limitations, and that's the easy thing to focus on. He has to play drop coverage. He's going to get put on skates if he's in ball screen situations. He's not a floor spacer. He's going to kind of clog up the paint, but he's not. Again, to use like Timme or Bacot or those guys as examples, those guys are great low post scorers who probably would be less effective as low post scorers in the NBA because they'd be going up against higher level athletes and bigger players. And you're not going to funnel your offense through a big man in the NBA the way that you do in college. That's still true. But if you're playing Zach Edey, you can. And I think that's the thing that is getting missed here is like Memphis can put Zach Edey in the game, pound the ball to him and let him go to work, and he's still going to score because he is so big, and he creates a mismatch. If you put Zach Edey in the game, you force the other team to do something different. They can try to run small on you. And yes, it might work because you have to run drop coverage. And if the other team has the ability to attack you in drop coverage, they're probably going to get their points. But if they're playing a small lineup and you put Zach Edey in, guess what? You're going to get points too. And I think that's the area that this gets missed a little bit. And for Memphis, they already have some smaller athletic bigs and Brandon Clark and a Jaren Jackson Jr. who are good defenders, but they're both Clark's 6'8". I think Jaren Jackson's similar height, if not maybe a little taller, but they already have these kind of undersized, versatile defensive bigs. Now you add this just hulking man and Zach Edey to the mix. I think this works well for Memphis. I get that people think, 9 was too high, but you get a guy who's going to fill a role for you automatically. I like that. Yep. I don't know, we talk about, is it changing? Clingan's a bit of an exception as well, but the rest of the bigs that went here, like Ware's a stretch 5. He's a stretch big. Holmes is a stretch big. Like that's kind of the more modern NBA big. Missy is a little bit more of a traditional big.
It's more potential.
He's just raw. I think Eves Missy could be really good in time. He's just super raw, but he's a rim runner, screen, pick and roll guy. He's not going to be a floor spacer or anything like that. But I think that we are seeing a gradual shift, but I also think a lot of this is just Edey's a freaking tank, and he's hard to pin down or hard to put into any kind of box because he's an incredibly unique player.
And there's space even for these non-shooting, more undersized guys. Like TJD had like 8 and 5 for the Warriors this past year. And so it's like, it's just going to be interesting to watch with all this. By the way, Zach Edey was one of the players invited to the green room. Didn't go. I love it. Just wanted to be with his family and friends. And so we saw shots of him with his Purdue teammates. And Andy, one of my favorite things of the entire first round of the NBA draft was my eyes weren't even drawn to Zach Edey. My eyes were drawn to Mason Gillis, who has since transferred to Duke, but was there with his Purdue teammates, hanging out, celebrating Zach Edey. I love that for the camaraderie of it for Purdue. If I'm John Shire, I am elated at seeing something like that, thinking about like, this is a culture guide that can help my freshmen figure out how to be good basketball teammates and stuff. So just some of that's really interesting to me as well.
Yeah. And I think just to kind of put a pin on it a little bit too here with the big man conversation, I generally think that going forward, we're still going to see teams prioritize the bigs who can space the floor, who can kind of offer more what you want in a modern big. But Clingan is so dynamic. We're seeing it more and more with other. I mean, there are guys in the NBA who provide rim protection and rebounding, who don't space the floor, who are playing successfully. Walker Kessler is a great recent example of that. Rudy Gobert is obviously the most notable example recently as an all NBA defensive player who is kind of forced into drop coverage. But I don't think that this is a huge shift that we're going to see going forward. I still think the traditional back to the basket, low post scoring bigs in college are probably not going to be high level picks in the NBA, but it'll be really interesting to see how Edey does for a variety of reasons. But if he does have success, I do wonder if that'll shift things, even though, again, other bigs in college basketball are not, there's nobody else like Zach Edey who's coming through the pipeline that I know of anyway.
He's a beautiful unicorn, a beautiful Canadian unicorn, and that's part of why we love him. Now, Andy, on draft night, there were always surprises, both up and down. And look, Dalton Knecht, we thought would be a lottery pick. Unfortunately, he fell out of the lottery. But Andy, this man going from a JUCO player to the Lakers is one of the wildest stories you will ever hear. We're going to talk about that and a couple other surprises from draft night 1 coming up in just a second. Right after I tell you about game time, going to MLB games in the summer is one of my favorite all-time things. The game, the food, everything that's part of the experience. I'm going home to Atlanta next week. I'm going to be at the Braves game on July 4th. I've already got tickets, but if I didn't need them, man, I could use something like Game Time, which is this great app to help you find last-minute tickets. And one of the great things about it is that tickets on the Game Time app go down, actually, the closer you get to the first pitch. So if you don't want to have to sweat high-price last-minute tickets, because good news, Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball. You can go find some great deals here. They've got killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and the best price, lowest price guarantee. With all of that, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. Andy, we're getting close to the All-Star break for Major League Baseball. I went and looked up some tickets. Cheapest, you can get in for $210 into the outfield. They've got a flash deal going on right now, $281 in the lower section there at Globe Live. So find your way to the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex and get to the All-Star game. Now, take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Terms apply. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. We're going to talk next about some surprises from the first round of the NBA draft. We're going to talk about really the whole Dalton Knecht arc because it's such a crazy big picture surprise. But then there's a couple other guys we want to talk about that actually passed like ships in the night from what we would have thought about them this time last year to where they ended up on Wednesday evening. So, Andy, Dalton Knecht, I mean, how can you not love a story like this? Goes from JUCO, where he was like 5'2", not really, but he was like not as tall, goes to the other UNC, Northern Colorado, then to Tennessee last year, where he absolutely blew up and went off and had a stellar All-American season. And were it not for that Zach Edey guy we just talked about, he's probably your national player of the year. It's insane and absurd. And while we thought that he would probably go in the lottery, and I still think he should have, he does fall, but he falls to the Lakers, where he might be playing with LeBron, but he's definitely playing for one of the best shooters in all of NCAA history, Mr. JJ Redick.
If any player in this class was equipped to handle sliding in the draft, I feel like it's Dalton Knecht. And that's not to say that there are other players who are not going to handle it well. I don't know. It's hard to know everybody's mentality.
You just called everyone else a baby. I heard it. They're all emotionally ill-equipped.
Clearly, none of them are going to be able to handle it. But no, Knecht, his story is already so surreal, and to even be in this conversation from where he was a year ago feels insane. And yet, yeah, he was a guy that most people thought was going to be in the top 10. I don't remember seeing any mocks that had him out of the lottery. Very few that even had him outside the top 10. And yet he slides on draft day. It's another chip in the shoulder. It's another kind of reason for him to feel like, hey, I've been disrespected. I haven't been given the flowers that I deserve for the season that I had. But he has withstood that adversity. He's starts the junior college level, doesn't get D1 offers, ends up at Northern Colorado, or gets very few D1 offers, ends up in Northern Colorado in his hometown, plays really good basketball there, transfers to Tennessee, dominates for the Vols, like we talked about, and then still doesn't quite get as much love as we expected he would in this draft process. People were stunned that he was still on the draft. I was stunned that he didn't go to Miami at 15. Like, that felt like a spot that made a ton of sense for him, basically just a cheaper Duncan Robinson replacement for them. But he ends up in LA. And I think, again, we're assuming LeBron returns to the Lakers. We don't know that for sure. He's obviously going to test free agency. He's indicated that much. But if he does end up there, LeBron loves having shooters around him, and Dalton Knecht is really, really, really good at being a floor spacing wing. He's got more in his bag than that. He can attack closeouts. He can get to the rim. He's a strong physical player. And the reason he fell, and they talked about this on the broadcast, is effectively his age. And I'm surprised by this because historically teams have been hesitant to draft older prospects. That's not new to the NBA draft, but in recent years, we've kind of seen a shift away from that.
Right.
We've seen the Jaime Jaquez is like this really successful draft pick. You know, he's 19th overall for the Miami Heat, immediately had success because he was just like a gamer. He was just a dude who succeeded for 4 years at UCLA, and Miami was like, well, he's a good basketball player. We're going to take him. And we saw some of those guys later in this draft. Baylor Shireman, I think, is a great example of that. He went in the first round, albeit barely, but he did. And Tristan da Silva went in the first round, a 4-year guy as well. So there were a few of them, but it was surprising to see Knecht fall so much because of his age, especially because players that are somewhat similar to him that were 4 or 5 year guys in college have had success. Corey Kispert is one of the most commonly compared players to Dalton Knecht. There are some similarities. They're also not quite as similar as people make them out to be, but Kispert went 15th and has performed better than a 15th overall pick. He averaged like 20 per game for the last half of the season last year for Washington. Desmond Bane is probably the best example here, a guy who is considered he's a shooter only who, you know, is an older prospect, so we're not going to waste a draft pick on him until pick 30, I think is where he went. Guess what? Desmond Bane is really, really, really good. And Dalton Knecht is a player that has been perceived as, oh, he's an older guy who's a shooter only. And that's not true. We watched him in college. We know that that's not true. He's got more versatility to his game. So it feels like a lot of, I'm surprised because it feels like a lot of NBA scouts or general managers or whoever kind of fell into this trap of treating him like, oh, he's an older prospect who kind of only does one thing well, and we don't value those guys all that highly, when there's been a lot of players who are profiled that way who have found a lot of success in the NBA. So that's what surprises me more than anything about this. I think maybe they overthought it or they underthought it. I don't know what the situation was, but if you were watching the draft, folks, and you saw JJ Redick's just 10,000 watt smile right after the 16th pick was announced, and they were like, oh, it looks like they've got their guy. Yeah, he knew as soon as that 16th pick came in, he's like, we're going to go get Dalton. I mean, he's going to fit perfectly, because if there's a coach who can write a play for Dalton Knecht to get open, it's going to be JJ Redick. I'm really excited to see how that shakes out for him.
Well, and I tell you what, I think that 10,000 megawatt smile was reciprocated by the guy that he drafted. Because, dude, Dalton Knecht is going to benefit. He already knows how to use his body so well to create space, to get open, to do what he needs to do. But to continue learning from Redick in a very hands-on sort of way is going to be massive. I even saw a quote from Knecht later on Wednesday night. Quote, "That's really exciting," talking about playing at LA for JJ. At Tennessee, I watched a lot of JJ Redick film with Coach Barnes, just the way he moves and paces himself and was able to create space. It's going to be real special, end quote. And so, man, I'm really excited for that, Andy. Yeah. Now, let's move to a couple other surprises. If we rewound the tape, be kind, rewind, baby. Let's go back to the Blockbuster days. To this time last year, Andy, we were talking about Isaiah Collier as the presumptive, as the projected number 1 pick in the draft that just took place on Wednesday night. We look at Reed Sheppard, who was ranked 5th, not in the class. He was ranked 5th of his own Kentucky class, right? 4 other Kentucky players, incoming freshmen, were ranked more highly than was Reed Sheppard. Bonkers kind of stuff there. So Reed Sheppard was drafted higher in the NBA draft overall than he was even on his own draft class last year in Lexington, Kentucky. Andy Sheppard goes from 79th consensus, I think you had said right before we started, to 3rd overall draft pick, first college player off the board. Meanwhile, Isaiah Collier goes from presumptive 1st overall to just being right there at the end, at or near the end of the 1st round. And so what was he, 29th to Utah? And so it's like, man, crazy stuff there. Andy, was this shocking to you? I know we had all the mocks had Reed Sheppard up that high, but it's just it's still so mind-boggling to me.
Yeah, it wasn't shocking to me in this particular moment. In fact, I had mocked Reed Sheppard 3rd in the mock drafts that I had written up a handful of times, and I think I'd mocked Collier around 20, 21, somewhere in there. So He ended up falling a little bit farther than that, but like it wasn't surprising day of. But yeah, a year ago, if you had flipped them, if you'd flipped these two and you told me Isaiah Collier is going to go third, Reed Sheppard's going to go 21st, it would still be shocking to me that Reed Sheppard was going 21st in the draft. Collier going third would have felt about right. But now, or 29th. Right now, you flip it to what actually happened. You have Sheppard going third, Collier going 29th. And that's just, I mean, absolutely baffling. It's Sheppard's going from being the 5th highest rated recruit on Kentucky's roster to being the first college basketball player selected is just, I mean, it's just insane. That's so unbelievably unique. And for Sheppard to do it as an undersized guard, I mean, the type of player that is not outside of the immobile bigs or the non-shooting bigs, which we just had a lengthy conversation about. One of the player archetypes that's succeeding in college that's not succeeding in the NBA is undersized two guards or undersized guys who aren't going to play point guard. That's why Caleb Love's back in college. That's why RJ Davis is back in college. That's why Mark Sears is back in college. It's like those guys aren't really finding a lot of success sticking in the NBA. Sheppard should be in that category. He's undersized. He can play point guard, but Houston didn't draft him to be an on-ball player. They drafted him because he is an elite, capital E, elite three-point shooter. That's why they drafted him. This dude is lights the heck out from deep. And on a Houston roster that already has an oversized non-shooting point guard in Amen Thompson, getting an undersized two guard who shoots the crap out of the basketball kind of makes sense. It kind of fits for Houston's dynamic. But yeah, I mean, not only if you go back a year ago and have this conversation, would it blow people's minds, but it wasn't even that long ago that we were like, is Mark Pope going to be able to convince Reed Sheppard to come back to school? That was a legitimate conversation that we had on the show, like, not even 2 months ago. And now Reed Sheppard's the first college basketball player selected. Like, of course he shouldn't have returned to school. Like, you can't do better than third. I mean, you could barely do better than third overall. Like, it's an insane story for him. For Collier, I still believe in him. I'm not surprised he fell. I'm a little surprised at how far he fell, but I still do believe that there's a lot of talent there. But yeah, it was a rough season. It was a rough season for USC. It was a rough season for him with the turnovers. If Utah can find a way to turn this around, I think they get themselves very arguably one of, if not the very best steal of this draft. I mean, between him or Knecht in my mind, but I wouldn't be surprised if we look back on this draft and we're like, wow, we overthought it with Isaiah Collier.
Andy, one of the thing I'm most interested to see about Reed Sheppard is if his absurd amount of steals that he had at Kentucky translates to the NBA, because I don't think he projects as a great athletic defender at the NBA level, but are his instincts good enough to keep those numbers up? The shooting's going to be there. So I'm curious on that. One other quick surprise that I don't think is a surprise to you and I, because we love this dude, is Pittsburgh's Bub Carrington going 14th to Washington. I love this. He's an absolute stud. And so not a surprise to you and I, but maybe a surprise to some of the randos or casuals out there in college basketball land, or in NBA land, more specifically.
Well, speaking of surprises, Duke star Kyle Filipowski, who returned to school expected to boost his draft stock, had a fantastic sophomore year at Duke. He sat in the green room alongside Johnny Furphy, kind of an up-and-coming wing out of Kansas. Both those guys spent their whole night hanging out in the green room, and they didn't hear their name called in round one. Are you surprised? So are we, and we're going to talk about it in just a second. Duke star Kyle Filipowski, who returned to school expected to boost his draft stock, had a fantastic sophomore year at Duke. There's reason to believe that his NBA skill set is maybe there's going to be some problems potentially, but I don't know. I was surprised that he didn't end up getting picked in the first round. What about you?
Very much so. I mean, like, he's undersized as a 5, but he kind of had to play that for Duke this year. And like, I don't know, the year before he had been doing that, had been playing 4 with Lively at the 5, and that made a lot more sense. But it still feels weird that he falls out of the first round, and you got a couple people that most people have never even heard of coming out of nowhere at 25, and so it's like, it is interesting to me. He's not going to last long today on Thursday though. I mean, he's going to be first 2 or 3 picks off the board.
Yeah, I think people are probably concerned a little bit about the defense and the outside shooting. He's kind of projected as a stretch four, a floor spacing big, and he is in the sense that he can handle the ball away from the rim. He's comfortable being away from the basket, but he's not. He wasn't a great 3-point shooter. I think the shot's going to show up. I think he's going to be an effective stretch four in the NBA, stretch five, stretch four, whatever role you want him to be. But I can understand why you're like, okay, well, he's not a great defender and he didn't actually shoot it that well. So if that doesn't translate, he becomes a tall player that can stand away from the rim and connect, make passes and set screens, but he doesn't do a whole lot else. And I think that's kind of a negative way to look at it, but I can see why scouts might be a little bit hesitant. But like I was telling you offline, like I have a buddy who's a Milwaukee fan, and they took AJ Johnson, who was supposed to go to Texas, didn't end up going to Texas, went to the NBL and barely played in Australia. And it's like, Milwaukee could have probably used a stretch five in Kyle Filipowski, and they don't take him. And there's a couple other teams, in that spot that I think could have used a guy like Filipowski, and they chose not to take him. So I'm a little interested in that. And we also had two really good college basketball teams last year who each had 2 draft picks that we kind of expected to end up in the first round, at least some of those guys, and they did not. As the Kansas Jayhawks, who, of course, Johnny Furphy, who we talked about a little bit, as well as Kevin McCullough, both guys who had been mocked previously in the first round. Neither of them end up getting selected. You also look at Shaka Smart's Marquette team, Tyler Kolek and Oso Ighodaro, both guys who Kolek had a lot of momentum towards Phoenix, but he didn't have a lot of other first-round buzz. Oso is probably the least likely of this group to end up in the first round, but still two big-time teams with 4 big-time players, and none of those guys ended up going in that first round.
Yeah, very interesting. Similar to Flip, though, I think they will Oso probably a little bit later, but those other 3 guys, Furphy, Kolek, and I think that's the order I will expect to see those 3 guys, Furphy, Kolek, McCullough, would be my
And
thought.
you think Furphy, Kolek, McCullough, and Filipowski. So we're talking 4 guys. You start at pick 31. Do you think they're all gone by pick 40?
By 40?
Mm-hmm.
Man, that's tough for all 4 of those guys.
Yeah.
I'll say yeah. I think
so. I was going to say 36, but that's like really pushing it. But by 40, I think so.
No, because I think legitimately, like, you referenced yesterday's show with Leaf and I, one of the conversations we had was who's the last guy in the green room. Mm-hmm. And both Flip and Furphy were the last 2 guys in the green room. Mm-hmm. And I expect them to be gone within both of them within the first 2 or 3 picks. And then you're just looking at Kolek and McCullough. Kolek's ability to run a team and everything else he can do, I think it's just too much to go past 40. Yeah. With McCullough, same kind of thing. I know there is some kind of like question about some of the things he does, but I think he would be, if one of those 4 doesn't go in the top 40, it's McCullough.
And for me, one thing I'm interested with Kolek in particular is you now have 3 veteran, very talented point guards who are all from the high major level, who are all now available in the second round. You have Tyler Kolek, you have Jamal Shedd from Houston, you have KJ Simpson from Colorado. There's some other good point guards in the second round too. AJ Mitchell from Santa Barbara is the one that comes to mind in particular. But those 3, Shedd, Simpson, and Kolek, like they all offer very different things. Obviously, Kolek's the connector, the facilitator. Shedd's an elite defensive player. KJ Simpson's the scorer out of the bunch. But I'm very intrigued to see I could see all 3 of those guys having very productive, lengthy NBA careers, but I could also see all 3 of them flaming out and being 2-way guys and not really ever sticking. So it'll be really interesting to see. It feels like fit is going to be really important there. And there's some teams that need some point guard depth that have really good coaching. And I think all 3 of those guys are angling to figure out how can I get myself here, because that's going to make a better chance of me being able to stick in the NBA. But those are 3 guys that I'm really intrigued to see how the second round shakes out for.
Yeah. Fit was the word that was literally on the tip of my tongue as well. Mm-hmm. Getting drafted by the team that needs what they uniquely each have to offer and being developed in that way is critical. And I wonder, even like getting man, could you imagine having Tyler Kolek behind a veteran guard and just having Kolek run your second unit for a couple of years? Like that feels like a big win, just knowing how good he is at so many things. Mm-hmm. And just what in a Cam Spencer sort of way, just what a kind of guy he is, man. He just don't play, and I love it. So, Andy, good stuff. Well, gang, Andy's going to be diving in on tomorrow's show on Friday with all the round 2 and then big picture takeaways from this thing. He'll be talking conference breakdowns, how the conferences are represented between both first and second round, and some other good takeaways as well. And so make sure you tune in for that as you get into your weekend. If you're not subscribed to the show to get notifications that that's happening, boy, you're missing out. You can do that both on audio and video. As Andy said earlier, if you're not in the Locked On College Basketball Discord, we'd absolutely love to have you. Again, the link is in the show notes and it's free to join. Come on and be part of that thing with us. All right. As always, apologies to the lawyer family. Let's go Wildcats. There's no NBA Wildcats.
There is not.
Too many Wildcats in college, not enough in the NBA. Andy will be right back with you tomorrow, but until then, peace.